The White House says President Trump has gotten warring Presidents Putin and Zelenskyy to agree to talk. That will likely have been the easy part. In the 24 hours since Trump hosted Zelenskyy and European leaders, more questions than answers have emerged. Should a ceasefire be agreed to first? Will Putin honor any deal that gets made? Who will provide security for Ukraine? President Trump did shed some light on that question, at least in terms of U.S. troops. In an interview with Fox News, he said American military will not be on the ground in Ukraine.
Well, you have my assurance, I'm president, and I'm just trying to stop people from being killed, Charlie. Look, they're losing from 5,000 to 7,000 people a week in that ridiculous war that should have never happened.
While negotiations for peace have increased, the relentless bombing has also raged on. Russia carrying out its largest attacks in weeks in the overnight hours following Zelenskyy's White House visit, a campaign of violence that Putin has continued to carry out since the peace talks began last Friday. For the latest, we turn now to Nancy Cordes at the White House. Good to see you, Nancy. With President Trump ruling out U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine, what could U.S. involvement in a security guarantee for Ukraine actually look like?
Well, that's still being hammered out, Nicole. Good to see you. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, I'm told, is the point person for U.S. discussions with European leaders about exactly what these security guarantees are going to look like. And yes, President Trump said it probably won't involve troops on the ground, but he said it's possible that the U.S. could provide security from the air. He didn't elaborate, so we don't really know if that means U.S. fighter jets over Ukraine in a post-war world, or if it means something like anti-aircraft defenses to prevent another air attack like the ones that we've seen over the past 3.5 years from Russia. But, nevertheless, I'm told that they are moving full steam ahead. There are meetings taking place across Europe between European leaders and U.S. leaders with the goal of really hammering this out, figuring out what it would look like sometime in the next 10 days.
The White House says that plans for a potential summit between President Putin and Zelenskyy are underway. Let's take a listen to what Mr. Trump said earlier on that front.
We're setting up a meeting. I sort of set it up with Putin and Zelenskyy, and they're the ones that have to call the shots. We're 7,000 miles away, in all fairness.
Nancy, I know you have some new reporting on where these talks potentially could take place. What have you learned?
I've learned that one of the cities in the running is Budapest, Hungary, and that White House officials are hoping to be able to nail down the location and the date for these talks within the next couple of days, with the goal of having Putin and Zelenskyy sit down for their first meeting since this war broke out sometime in the next couple of weeks. Now, that's not the impression you would get if you listen to what the Russians are saying. They claim today that, yes, there are going to be meetings, but they didn't confirm that Putin would be involved. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, said that any meeting like that between leaders would require thorough planning before anything could happen. But I've been told that this is typical Russian posturing and that Putin has accepted President Trump's offer to broker a meeting. That conversation took place over the phone last night, and they believe that this sit-down is going to happen sometime in the next couple of weeks.
All right, Nancy Cordes, thank you so much for joining us. Seth Jones joins me now. He is the president of the Defense and Security Department at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Seth, what do you make of where things stand at this point? How likely are these talks?
Well, Nicole, I've got somewhat low expectations for the moment for two reasons. One is we have not heard from the Kremlin, particularly from Putin, backing away from his view that Ukraine should not exist as a sovereign, independent state, certainly one that he believes should be, at the very least, in Russia's sphere of influence. So the Russians have not changed that sort of long-term view. The second is the U.S. in particular and the Trump administration have not been prepared with the Russians dragging the talks out so far, have not been prepared to punish the Russians for dragging this out, haven't been willing to sanction them, and haven't been willing to increase weapons to the Ukrainians right now. So I think until we see some movement in both of those places, I think my expectation is going to be these are really talks right now. We're not making a lot of progress on either a ceasefire or any kind of settlement.
I was going to say, we've also heard from a number of European leaders that they believe that a ceasefire should be in place as a precondition for these talks. Do you think that that will happen or could happen? It seems the president's been backing away.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's going to be hard to get to a final settlement unless there are some trusting steps that both sides take. Ceasefires are usually the steps that the sides take to test the trust and the willingness of the sides to abide by agreement. I don't think without something like that, you're going to be able to resolve what are huge differences on land and a range of factors like that.
Yeah, and just walk us through this process. I mean, if these two leaders, President Putin and Zelenskyy, do sit down with one another, what are some of these major points that they will need to talk through?
Well, I think there are at least two sets of issues. One is territory. The Russians control about 20% of Ukraine. Is there some? Do they start trading territory? Do the Ukrainians are they willing to concede territory to the Russians, or do we get what we get in North Korea and South Korea, which is essentially an armistice, where neither side actually formally agrees to acknowledge the other's territorial control, but they stop the fighting for now? And the second issue is, will the Russians agree, because the Ukrainians are going to want it, an increase in weapon sales, probably European forces on the ground to provide training, and the continuation of Western help to Ukraine.
I mean, how critical is it at this juncture for President Putin and Zelenskyy to have a one-on-one meeting?
I'm not sure it's essential. I think they need to talk. If the U.S. was there, I think that could be done. I'm not sure they necessarily have to talk one-on-one without anyone else there. I mean, there are plenty of other peace deals that have happened with third parties involved in that.
I mean, at the end of the day, given the president's meeting with President Putin in Alaska, these meetings with European leaders and President Zelenskyy, does this move the ball forward in any way? I know earlier you said you kind of had low expectations, but is this moving the ball forward in a meaningful way, in your opinion?
Yeah, Nicole, I think what is important is that it hasn't moved the ball backwards. I think that was the biggest concern with the Europeans, is that President Trump would do a deal with the Russians without the Europeans being involved, or that much like Zelenskyy's last meeting in the White House, that it would go really poorly and set the discussions back. I think what has at least happened is that the worst case scenarios, for now anyway, are behind us, and there are actually talks now moving forward.
We know that the White House has indicated that the president wants to end this war as soon as possible. Do you think that can get done by the end of this year?
I think it is possible for negotiations to happen before the end of the year, but I think it's only likely, Nicole, if the U.S. is willing to combine sanctions and weapon sales to the Ukrainians if the Russians shirk, because I think at every step of this way, the Russians have dragged their feet.
All right, Seth Jones, we really appreciate you for joining us here on The Takeout.
Thank you.